Salam everyone, welcome back to your Quran only research channel. My name is Dr. Syed, and today I'm going to be talking about, I've done a lot of research on this, of course, within the Quran only, and the concept here I'm going to be talking about in this video, in this lecture, is the divorce concept and how it works, who gives it, and there's so many things and there's so many ambiguities out there that if you read all of the other texts, depending on which country you're in, which area, region, or culture you belong to, everyone seems to have their own interpretation of this particular word, concept, and its applications. So I'm going to go ahead and clarify according to the Quran, which is fairly straightforward, but I'm going to go ahead and actually give you the details. So let's dive right in and take a look at what this word and different forms of word and what this does for us. What does it mean, and what does the implementation as a result, right? If that happens. All right, so the triliteral root, which is ta, lam, qaf, occurs 23 times in the Quran. Okay, so not that many, but 23 times this word occurs, and it occurs in 4 derived forms. 10 times as the form to verb, talaqa, 9 times as the form 7 verb, in talaqa, twice as the noun itself, talaq, and then twice as the form to passive participle, mutalaqat. And the majority of the time, this word, in fact, is only detailed out in Surah Al-Baqarah, which is chapter 2 of the Quran. And it starts with verse 227 and goes all the way to 241, and it covers the noun, passive participles, and of course all of the verb form to, which is to divorce. So I'm going to go ahead and of course go through, as I always do, in context, so you understand what God is referring to and explaining to us as to how this process works, what is it, and what do we need to do. So let's jump in and go to our Surah Al-Baqarah. Let me go ahead and open this up. There we go. So I'm going to start a little bit prior to this, right? So a few verses up, so that we sort of like go through the flow and understand the context better. And then by the end of this, you'll be having a clear picture as to what this concept is and how it's applied and what God has told us to do, right? As a matter of guidance for all mankind. Because remember, Quran is not just for Muslims, it's for everyone. It is guidance sent by God for everyone, whoever wants to follow. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open this up. Verse 224 of Surah Al-Baqarah, which is chapter 2. God says, "And make not God a cover for your oaths to keep you from virtue, and be in prudent fear, and make right between men, and God is hearing, knowing." Verse 225, God takes you not to task for vain speech in your oaths, but he takes you to task for what your hearts earn, and God is forgiving, forbearing. This is where the concept now starts talking about wives. For those who forswear their wives is a wait of 4 months. But if they return, God is forgiving, merciful. Notice here there is no word yet of talaq, right? There's no divorce word used, but if you just forswear your wife, it's a wait of 4 months. But if they return, God is forgiving, merciful. So verse 227, this is where the word comes in, which is talaq. And if they decide upon divorce, 227 verse, God is hearing and knowing. And divorced women shall wait by themselves 3 menstrual courses, which essentially could be 3 months. And it is not lawful for them to conceal what God has created in their wombs. So if they're pregnant, they must let everyone know that, hey, I'm pregnant, so that the next verses will follow, will tell us or provide guidance to us as to what to do. So if they believe God and the last day, and their husbands have more right to take them back during that if they desire right ordering. And due to women is the like of what is due from them according to what is fitting. But men have a degree over women, and God is mighty wise. Verse 229, which is very straightforward. At-talaqu marratan. Divorce is twice. Now, in many cultures, many countries, people say, well, divorce is once. If you pronounce it 3 times, it's done. And there's so many other interpretations and applications. But the Quran is clear. The Quran says divorce is twice. Well, if we continue on reading, God explains to us what this all means. Okay? So, divorce is twice. Keep that in mind. Then retaining according to what is fitting or releasing with good conduct. And it is not lawful for you to take anything from what you have given women, save if they fear that they might not uphold the limits of God. Then if you fear that they will not uphold the limits of God, they do no wrong in that she free herself thereby. Those are the limits of God. Fairly straightforward so far. Let's continue. Transgress them not. And whoso transgresses the limits of God, these are the wrongdoers. Verse 230. And if he divorce her, she is not lawful to him thereafter until she marry a spouse other than him. Okay? So far we've seen that divorce is twice. First, you got to let go, right, for 3 months. And whatever the verses are on the top as I read, okay? And then if the divorce, and if you do divorce her, then she's not lawful thereafter, right? Until she marry a spouse other than him. Then if you divorce her, they do no wrong to return to each other, if they consider that they will uphold the limits of God, and those are the limits of God. He makes them plain for people who know. يُبَيِّنُهَا لِقَوْمٍ يَعْلَمُونَ. So God makes things plain for people who know, who have knowledge. And when you divorce women and their term be reached, retain them according to what is fitting, or release them according to what is fitting. And retain them not through harm that you might transgress. And whoso does that has wronged his soul. And make not mockery of the proofs of God. And remember the grace of God towards you and what he has sent down to you of the law, and the wisdom whereby he exhorts you. And be in prudent fear of God. And know that God knows all things. Verse 232. And when you divorce women and their term be reached, now this is again repeating, the verse repeats again. And when you divorce women that their term be reached, hinder not their marrying their spouses, when they come to terms according to what is fitting, that whereto is exhorted he who among you believes in God and the last day. That is purer and cleaner for you, and God knows and you know not. Verse 233. And mothers shall suckle their children 2 whole years, right? For such as wish to complete the suckling. And then the next concept changes, right? So the divorce concept for this particular verse ends at 233. So I'm going to just verify by looking at, we started off with 224, like 227, right? That's where the noun first came in. And then 229 or 228, 229, both passive participles. And then all of the form 2 verbs for Surah Al-Baqarah, right? Which is chapter 2. All of these were simply narrated, okay? Because it's pretty straightforward. And like I said, divorce is twice, and God explains the entire process so far. All right, so I'm going to jump to the next set of words that occur in chapter 65, chapter 18, 26, 38, and majority of them, or most of the rest of them, basically refer to either directly to the prophet, right? But let's take a look at those as well. But the main concept is simply explained in Surah Al-Baqarah, okay? All right, but let's move forward so that we understand a little bit better as to what other meanings there are for the word fantalaka. Now, before I actually move forward, let's go ahead and open up our lexicon, which is the dictionary, right? And just take a look at this word, what this word means. to further corroborate of what we're talking about. So you will find this by Edward Lane. This is online and you can download it in PDF. I'll leave a link in the description below for you. On page 1871, you'll find the root word talaq. Okay, this is the word that you see right here. And the basic meaning of this word, let me expand this a little bit, is basically the she-camel was or became loosened from her bond or cord by which her foreshank and her arm had been bound together. So that's talaq, right? To part way, basically, or loosen from a particular bond or cord. So this word has a root meaning basically coming from a she-camel. Let's take a look at some of the other meanings of this word or the subset of this word. All right, so scroll down. All right, talaq naqa, right? He left alone or let go his she-camel. So letting go. And the other sense is he divorced his wife. He separated his wife from himself by a sentence of divorce. So talaq in this sense is opposed to raja'a, and hence the meanings of these two verbs in a verse of, and which is also cited in other, he left, he quitted the country. Talaq al-bilad, right? So we get the idea. Basically is to part ways, to set forth, to move, to go, to break. Okay? So talaq, for example, the loosening or setting loose or free and letting go. So fairly straightforward meanings within the dictionary as well. If I move on to the next page, because it has a few pages that explains this word, for example, and different forms in Arabic language. For example, you'd see here, instead of gazelle, he went along, or bounded by his running, or was briskly in one direction. Okay, so again, this is also meaning in terms of setting forth or moving forward. The horse went, and he, without restraining themselves to the goal. Okay, so talaq, loosened from his bond, set to loose or free, let go, and a man not having anything upon him, and camel not having the forelegs bound. So basically you're freeing the person or freeing the animal, and he was imprisoned without shackle and without bond. Okay, so we get the idea. Perfect. Let's move back to our other chapters where this word occurs. Now, let me first go to, this word has been also mentioned in chapter 33, verse 49-8. So I'm going to navigate to that. All right, perfect. So this is chapter 33, which is Surah Al-Ahzab, which is the parties. And let me scroll down to where it starts to use this word. So let's navigate to and read for verse 49. Ya ayyuhallazina amanu, O you heed warning, when you marry believing women and divorce them before you have touched them. There is no number for you that you should count concerning them, but given them provision and release them with a comely release. So, pretty straightforward. This is when you actually get into a contract, you get married, but you have not touched your wife, so you let go, and there it is. That's all there is. So there is no number. In other words, there is no iddah. You don't have to wait 3 months or 3 menstrual cycles, or she doesn't have to, right? So that's the only occurrence of this word in Surah Al-Ahzab. Let's navigate back to and see what's next. All right, so we've covered Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Ahzab. Let's go to chapter 65, and this is where, this is Surah Al-Talaq. This is the entire surah about divorce, but this is specifically addressing, God is addressing, Allah is addressing to the Nabi, to the Prophet, Ya Ayyuhan Nabi, right? So let's navigate to 65, verse 1. All right, perfect. So the next occurrence of this word is in Surah chapter 65, which is Surah Talaq. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of God, Almighty, the Merciful. Verse number 1. O Prophet, when you divorce women, Ya ayyuhan nabi iza talaqtuhumun nisa. O Prophet, when you divorce women, divorce them after their waiting period, and count the waiting period, and be in prudent fear of God your Lord. Expel them not from their households, nor let them go forth, save if they commit manifest sexual immorality. And those are the limits of God. So, in this paragraph, or in this verse, which is just verse 1, God speaks directly to the prophet. Let's continue. And whoso transgresses the limits of God has wronged his soul. Thou knowest not the God might after that bring about a matter. Verse 2. And when they reach their term, retain them according to what is fitting, or release them according to what is fitting. So clearly there's a choice given, right? And the waiting period is the reasons behind this waiting period that God is allowing when you divorce, when you do decide to part ways, is the fact that, circumstances might change, hearts might change, things may get better, because we understand that there's a concept of like getting back together, okay, where one member of the family from one side, the other member of the family from the other side, from the male side and the female side, they also play an important role to bring back together two people who are parting ways. So definitely there's a whole process to it. It's not as simple, as easy as sometimes we hear and we see. There's definitely a process, and it is rightly so, because in the heat of the argument, for example, right, one could basically say, all right, I'm letting you go, I'm divorcing you, but God has other plans. God is guiding us to give some time to each other and things to settle. So even to the prophet right here in verse 2, God says, when they reach their term, retain them according to what is fitting, or release them according to what is fitting. And call to witness 2 just men among you, and uphold the witnesses before God. That is exhorted he who believes in God and the last day. And whoso is in prudent fear of God, he will make him a way out. Okay. So this is where God talks about the occurrence of the word talaq in Surah Talaq, right? So let's continue. Let's read verse 3. And will provide him without him reckoning. And whoso places his trust in God, he is sufficient for him. God achieves his command. God has set a measure of all things. قَدْ جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدْرًا. So everything has a measure of all things, right? Everything is basically by God. And for such of your women as despair of menstruation, if you doubt, their waiting period shall be 3 months. So here's another condition that is provided. As well for those who have not menstruated. And for those who are bearing, their waiting period shall be till they lay down their burden. Which means if they're pregnant, then we have to wait, or God is talking to the prophet, right? Wait until they actually give birth. And whoso is in prudent fear of God, he makes him of his command ease. That is the command of God he sent down to you. And whoso is in prudent fear of God, he removes from his evil and makes him a great reward. Let them dwell in what manner you dwell out of your means, and harm them not so as to constrict them. So again, talking about wives, when you're letting go, when you're divorcing, well, talking to the prophet, keep that in mind, by the way, right? Because the prophet directly is being addressed here. And if they be bearing spend on them until they lay down their burden, or of course until they give birth, that's where you have to spend on them. Then if they suckle for you, give them their reward, and take counsel among you according to what is fitting. And if there be difficulties between you, let another suckle for them. Let them who has abundance spend of his abundance, and whose provision is measured, let him spend on what God has given him. God imposes not upon a soul, save what he has given it. God will make after hardship ease. And how many a city scorned the command of its Lord and his messengers, which we then called to a stern account and punished with a detestable punishment. So this is where the prudent fear of God, and God continues to explain. Let's move on to the next occurrence. So we looked at chapter 2, Surah Al-Baqarah, the concept of talaq and its application and how it works is given twice, and then of course the holding period, right? Whether you let go or we get back together. And then let's take a look at, we took a look at verse chapter 65, and then 66 has only one occurrence, chapter 66, which is verse 5. So let's go ahead and let me go ahead and open that. All right, perfect. So this is Surah Al-Tahrim, which is chapter 66. And this again is also addressing to the Prophet, because the very first verse is God is saying, Ya Ayyuhan Nabi, O Prophet, what makest thou unlawful that which God has made lawful for thee, seeking to please thy wives? So this is clearly where the Prophet is being reminded that not to follow their wives' pleasures, but follow what God has commanded. And God is forgiving, merciful. God has ordained for you absolution from your oaths, and God is your benefactor, and He's the knowing, the wise. Verse 3. And when the Prophet confided a statement to one of his wives, when she told it, and God made it known to him, he made known part of it and passed over part. And when he informed her about what she said, who told thee this? He said, there told me the knowing, the aware. Verse 4. If you repent to God, then have your hearts inclined. But if you help each other against them, God is his benefactor, and Jibril, or Gabriel, and the righteous of the believers, and the angels are helpers as well. Verse 5, this is where the word occurs again, right? So verse 5, it may be that his Lord, if he divorces you, will give him in exchange wives better than you. And then the qualities of the female, the wives have been explained by God, right? The first quality is submitted, believing, devoutly dutiful, penitent, serving, journeying, previously married, and virgins. Right? So all these qualities, the God says he will provide to the Prophet. And then God starts to talk to Ya ayyuhallazina amanu, oh, you heed warning. So the Quran, of course, has, when you read the Quran, when you understand, when you take a look at it, pay attention to who it's addressing to. So if it's talking to the Prophet, then of course that's where you need to focus on. If it's talking about the believers, then of course we need to focus here as well. So it's important to understand the context, okay? So this is the occurrence of the word in chapter 66, which is Surah Tahrim. Let's move on to the next one. So we've covered Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Ahzab, Surah Al-Tahrim, which is again all of the action verbs, form 2, to divorce. And then let's go to chapter 18. There are 3 occurrences, right, within this surah. So let's navigate to that. Let me go ahead and open that. All right, perfect. So this is Surah Al-Kahf, the cave. And here, the context and the meaning of the word, of course, is different than to divorce. So the word is used فَانْطَلَقَهَا, so they set out, right? Because they're talking about the 7 sleepers, and this is the story about them. So verse 71, 72, and 73, this is where this word occurs again. So they set out, which is verse 71, when they had embarked on a boat, he made a hole therein. He said, hast thou made a hole therein to drown his people? Thou hast done a grave thing. And just to give you a little background on this context, this is Moses, or Prophet Musa, moving on to the journey, and he meets a slave of God, right? And he's continuing his journey with him. And that slave of God made a hole in the boat because he said, you cannot, go along with me because you would not have patience, and so on. So this is just a brief context of the story of the 7 sleepers in the Quran, which I'll cover in some subsequent videos. All right, let's continue. So 72 verse said he, said I not that thou canst not be patient with me? He said, take thou me not to task for what I forgot, nor burden thou me in my affair with difficulty. فَأَنْطَلَقَهَا, again, the same word. So they set out. So that's really where the occurrence of this word occurs within Surah Al-Kahf, which is chapter 18. Let's move to the next one. The next occurrence is chapter 26, which is again Yantalaqa, expresses well. And then chapter 38, and went forth. 48, you set forth. 68, so they went. Chapter 77, proceed, and then proceed. Okay, so this pretty much covers it. And you can take a look at the rest of these because these are pretty straightforward. Meaning, in other words, they're setting out, they both set out, or you set out, set forth, right? So in other words, proceed forward, which is in a sense, typically the root word, which we talked about earlier, is the fact to part ways, to actually move about, right? To go forward and leave everything back, or, loosen people or let go, right? That's basically the root word, which can be seen here as well. So essentially, I've covered all of the 23 occurrences of the word that occurs in the Quran for the word ta, lam, kaf, which is talaq, which is to divorce. So I hope this helps. Let me know if you have any questions. Comment down below. I'd like to hear your thoughts as to the concept of the divorce, which is again twice, talaqu maratan, right? It's twice, which means essentially you divorce once, and then you have a holding period, you have a waiting period, right? And then, of course, if you then decide to let go, that'll be your second time, okay? So that's really the reason or reasoning behind this entire process. And during that time, of course, there are multiple families or multiple sides from both the male side and the female side trying to patch up, right? Trying to help you patch things together and bring you back to common grounds, because for whatever reason there are any differences being created, or there be a heated argument or any other issues that are on that plate, right? People actually tend to diffuse the situation. That's what the holding period is all about. But then again, if the holding period is over, even that's when you decide that, hey, things are not going to work out even in the future. That's where you, of course, you can divorce, which is part of the Quran, part of the law of the nature, right? That's what God's law is all about. So it's not a bad thing. I've heard in comments, and a lot of questions come up where people say, well, that's a bad thing to do, right? Well, it is certainly bad because to some extent, but if it doesn't work out, then you let go. There are times where things just cannot be the same again, okay? And that's really what the bottom line is. So make sure that things work out pretty quickly, and people should patch up pretty quickly before, as time progresses, then distance is created, right? That's the idea behind the root word also. So there it is. I hope this helps. And again, make sure you check the root words within the William Lane dictionary, so you get a better idea as to how this word occurs. So hope this helps. Comment down below, and make sure you give it a like if you like this video, you like my videos, and certainly thank you for your support. And with this, thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Assalamu alaikum.